Hi, everyone. Welcome to Forbes Talks. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Matt Durot, my colleague on the wealth team. Matt, we're talking about MacKenzie Scott. How much has she given away in total at this point?
Sure. So a couple weeks ago, in mid-November, in her latest Medium post, which is how she's, decided to do her giving up until this point. She announced that she'd given $2 billion more over the last 7 months to more than 300 different organizations.
So, if you look at her net worth, and of course, she is the ex wife of Jeff Bezos, who has given away, I believe, considerably less money. How does their net worth compare at this point?
Sure. So it wasn't a, perfect 50-50 split to begin with. So it's not apples to apples, but she's certainly given away her wealth at a much faster rate than Bezos, who currently is worth about $115 billion versus McKenzie's roughly $30 billion.
Does she have a particular type of motif in terms of how she's giving? I know that she tends to give, relatively anonymously, but what kinds of organizations is she really focused on?
Sure. So up until this point, she's been really focused on racial justice, gender equality, uh, um, those sort of causes. And in this most recent round of $2 billion, what she does in her Medium post is she, says the total amount she gave out $2 billion, but she doesn't specify which organizations got which piece of that. But many of the organizations do come out and say how much they've gotten. So big recipients from the latest round who each got about $100 million each seem to be the Girl Scouts of America, Big Brothers Big Sisters, and the Urban League. So kind of in keeping with her focus today.
Which is good because I remember, I mean, those are organizations that can deploy that capital. There have been cases where I remember when Joan Kroc gave a huge amount of money to a poetry magazine and they just were almost paralyzed by it. One thing that I'm curious about, people talk about her changing the game of philanthropy. And I'm curious what you think, having covered a lot of, we have a lot of billionaires, a lot of them are giving their money away. She seems to be doing it in a different way than a lot of her peers.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a couple key differences, and you sort of alluded to one of them, which is, um, you know, I think she's rightly or wrongly been criticized in the past for sort of a lack of transparency. She doesn't have her own foundation, she doesn't have her own website, and no one really knows where the money is going until she does these Medium posts, which is typically how she, ultimately communicates her giving. She's committed to making steps to sort of address that criticism. They're going to, she says soon, pull together a searchable database of the gifts. So there'll be more transparency there. And then I think a lot of billionaire donors, when they give, significant sums, are very hands-on in terms of, how they want that money to be spent.
Gates Foundation, right?
Yeah, exactly. So up until this point, MacKenzie Scott's philosophy has really been to, step back and let the groups allocate the money however they wish. And that was, I guess, a unique twist in this latest round. We reported last month that kind of a first for her. She was actually, her and her team, very involved in choosing which Girl Scout chapters and which Big Brother, Big Sister chapters were going to get those funds. So yeah, a little more hands-on than she's been in the past.
How does she? I mean, we talked about how she compares to her ex-husband Jeff, but there are, I would assume, the dollar figures that we've seen from her put her in the top leagues of givers altogether. If not, is there anybody who has given more?
Yeah, so at this point, I mean, she's certainly given away her wealth a lot faster than anyone. And at this point, there are only four Americans ahead of her, all of whom have had, a lot longer to give away their fortunes. So that'd be Warren Buffett, Bill, and Melinda Gates, and then George Soros. But she's, she keeps it up, her current pace. I'm sure she'll be up there with them in no time.
And is her goal much like, I remember the DFS founder, to get down, well, maybe not to zero. I think he might have taken it to a whole different level, but Has she talked about the end game as to where she wants to end up?
Yeah. So I think back in 2019, around the time of her divorce from Jeff Bezos, she committed to giving away at least half her fortune in her lifetime. And while she's giving away money almost as fast as one reasonably could, she's still got a way to go. Her Amazon shares, which are, account for basically all of her net worth, are still worth almost $30 billion, despite, a terrible year for tech companies. They were worth, nearly $50 billion a few months ago. So a lot left to give.
Great. One other question, which is when we look at, and this may be too strong, but when we look at the way that women give, men give, is there been any similarities in how Melinda Gates is approaching her philanthropy and MacKenzie Scott? And I may be drawing false comparisons here because I know Melinda's very involved with the Gates Foundation, but we do tend to look at it through a gender context, and I've heard a lot around MacKenzie Scott, both the causes and the way she gives being different.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I don't know that I have a good answer for you. And I think, part of the reason is up until, very recently, Melinda French Gates' giving has been so tied to bills, and she's starting to branch off on her own. And yeah, maybe you will. Maybe we've even started to see a little bit different approach with her own personal giving, but hard for me to say at this point.
But no doubt that MacKenzie's changing the game in a lot of respects. So,
That's for sure.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Diane.